The evening silence of a small American town was shattered by whispers of fear. A young couple visiting their grandmother for dinner had no idea their visit would end in a bloodbath. In the morning, police would find two mutilated bodies in a house permeated with the smell of death. The young Johnson family lived in the suburbs of a small American town, where life flowed smoothly and predictably. Jonathan Johnson, a 32-year-old auto mechanic, was hardworking, quiet, and unambitious. His wife, 28-year-old Emily, worked as a nurse at a local clinic and was respected by her colleagues. Their marriage lasted 6 years and outwardly appeared strong, although those close to them were aware of minor disagreements and occasional quarrels, mostly related to domestic matters. Despite this, the couple made an effort to spend time together, and visits to relatives were part of their established routine. Emily was especially drawn to her grandmother, 74-year-old Margaret, who lived in an old wooden house on the outskirts of town. The house had once belonged to her late husband, and now served as a symbol of family history. Inside, everything had remained unchanged for decades. Old carpets, dark wood furniture, photographs on the walls. Every visit was a miniature journey back in time. That day, the couple decided to visit Margaret for no particular reason. Emily insisted on the trip, claiming she hadn't seen her grandmother in a while and that she needed care. Jonathan agreed, although he preferred to rest after work. Before leaving, they spent some time alone, indulging in intimacy, a rare moment of privacy in their busy daily lives. This episode seemed to underscore their desire to maintain the warmth of their relationship. The drive to Margaret's house took about 40 minutes. The autumn evening was quickly falling, plunging the narrow road between the fields into semi-darkness. Jonathan drove, trying not to discuss work issues, which he'd been talking about too often lately. Emily looked out the window, watching the lights of the scattered farms, and shared childhood memories. Their conversation was calm, without tension. Upon arrival, their grandmother greeted them warmly. Despite her age, she retained a clear mind and a firm voice. The table was already set in the kitchen. Simple food, homemade pies, and tea. The couple helped set the table, and the evening began in a typical family atmosphere. Margaret inquired about her grandchildren's activities, listened to Jonathan's work, Emily's shifts, and shared news from the neighbors. Margaret's neighborhood was unique. Several houses lined both sides of the street. Many residents had known each other for decades. In the evening, the street looked almost empty. Sparse streetlights illuminated the sidewalks, and only a solitary car passed by as the family sat eating dinner. Emily noticed the movement and said she hadn't seen new faces in the neighborhood in a while. As night approached, the conversation died down, and the couple remained in the living room. Jonathan helped his grandmother fix the door locks, as the old mechanism was sticking. This was important, considering that although the neighborhood was considered quiet, police had been reporting burglaries in the surrounding blocks in recent months. Margaret thanked her grandson and went to get ready for bed. Emily and Jonathan decided to stay the night so as not to return late. A separate bedroom was always ready for them. Before going to bed, they checked the door and windows again. Everything looked familiar and safe, though a subtle sense of unease lingered in the air, whether from fatigue or the silence, which felt too thick and unnatural. This seemingly ordinary night would soon become fateful. Meanwhile, the family fell asleep in the old house, unaware that within just a few hours, the peace would be shattered in the most brutal manner. Margaret's house stood on the outskirts of a small American town, where single-family homes interspersed with empty lots and abandoned barns. The neighborhood was considered relatively safe, but in recent years, petty crimes had become increasingly common. Car thefts, attempted home break-ins, and teenage mischief. This became a source of concern for older residents, but most continued to live their lives as usual, relying on old locks and trusting their neighbors. Margaret's neighbors had known her for a long time. To the left of her house lived a married couple, the Harrisons, both in their 60s. They often helped the elderly woman with her chores, mowing the lawn, bringing groceries, and sometimes driving her downtown. To the right lived a man named Richard, a widower in his 50s. He was withdrawn and unsociable, though he didn't display open aggression. His neighbors noted that sometimes in the evenings he would have visitors, unknown young men whose cars weren't always local. The street where Grandma lived ran toward the highway. The streetlights were widely spaced, and a profound silence reigned at night. That evening, when the Jonathans arrived at the house, a car with tinted windows did indeed drive by. No one paid it much attention, but the police later recorded statements from neighbors indicating that a similar car had been spotted in the area several times before. Despite her age, Grandma remained active. She cooked, tended the garden, and kept the house tidy. In conversations with her grandchildren, she mentioned hearing strange noises outside several times at night in recent weeks. It seemed as if someone was walking near her yard or checking the garage doors. At the time, she dismissed it, thinking it might have been teenagers. Over dinner, the conversation turned to the neighbors. Emily asked her grandmother if strangers bothered her. Margaret replied that the neighborhood was changing and new faces were appearing more and more often, although everyone used to know each other. Jonathan noted that the old house did indeed look vulnerable. Weak locks, old windows, dark corners of the garden. He recommended new locks and at least a motion-activated light. After dinner, Emily helped her grandmother clear the dishes, and Jonathan went out onto the porch for a smoke. He noticed a light shining through a window in his neighbor Richard's yard and a shadow flickering in it. It seemed there were several people inside, though that seemed unusual at that time of evening. He later dismissed it as unimportant and returned to the house. The night at Margaret's house began normally. Grandmother had gone about her business, getting ready for bed. She said goodnight to her grandchildren and locked herself in her bedroom. Emily and Jonathan settled into the guest room, where everything had remained unchanged since her childhood. The same wallpaper, the old wardrobe, the narrow bed. The evening passed peacefully, and nothing foreshadowed tragedy. Meanwhile, the Harrisons, their neighbors, turned off their lights around 10 p.m. as usual and went to bed. Richard's windows, on the other hand, remained lit for a long time. Some neighbors later reported hearing conversations and the sound of a car nearby, but were unable to pinpoint the source. The atmosphere on the street that day was peculiar, a thick silence punctuated by the occasional sound. Someone passed by, a lone dog barked in neighbor's house, but overall, the neighborhood was asleep. In such a setting, any stranger could easily approach the house. By midnight, Emily was already asleep. Jonathan lay awake for a while, listening to the sounds outside the window. He noticed the sound of an engine in the distance, then it faded. Silence reigned outside once more. Jonathan paid no attention to it, and soon fell asleep. The events that would unfold in the coming hours would come as a shock to the entire street. For now, everyone, the grandmother, her grandchildren, and neighbors, were in their usual calm. None of them knew that this very night would transform the quiet neighborhood into the scene of a brutal crime. Around 2 in the morning, Margaret's house fell completely silent. A breeze gently swayed the old shutters. Branches creaked in the garden, but inside, all was quiet. Grandmother was asleep in her room on the first floor. Jonathan and Emily were in the guest bedroom on the second. At that moment, according to witnesses, a car with tinted windows appeared on the street again. It stopped nearby and remained there for several minutes. According to investigators, it was then that the unknown intruder sprang into action. Marks on the back door indicated that the lock had been forced with a crude instrument, likely a screwdriver or crowbar. The lock gave way, and the door swung open almost silently. No one in the house woke up, although experts say Jonathan may have briefly gotten out of bed. A crumpled sock was found on the floor next to his shoes, as if he had been about to leave. The first thing they saw in the house was the hallway leading to the kitchen. At that moment, the grandmother likely heard rustling sounds and got out of bed. Footprints near her door indicate she walked out into the hallway, holding a flashlight. This is where the first attack occurred. Bloodstains and signs of a struggle were later found on the floor near her room. The knife stabbed her in the chest. She managed to scream, but the sound was short and muffled, as the second blow prevented her from calling for help. Jonathan woke up on the second floor. He heard noise, footsteps, and a falling object. Forensic experts concluded that he hurried out into the hallway, but didn't make it downstairs. The attacker was holding the same knife that had killed his grandmother. The attack took place near the stairs. Jonathan was stabbed twice in the chest and once in the neck. His body was later found near the railing, lying on his side, as if trying to get up. Emily was awakened by screams and noises. She ran into the hallway and saw her husband collapsed. At that moment, the attacker turned toward her. The scene was swift. The woman tried to retreat back into the room, but the killer caught up with her and stabbed her several times. The main blow landed in the abdomen, then 2 more in the chest. Emily collapsed at the bedroom door. Judging by the marks, she tried to resist, but her strength quickly gave out. At the crime scene, police later recorded that the blows were inflicted with great force and in a chaotic manner. This indicated the perpetrator was in a state of emotional distress or that the intent was murder rather than theft. However, several items were indeed missing from the house. Emily's purse, which contained money and documents, and Jonathan's cell phone. The Harrisons, who lived next door, heard nothing that night. They attributed this to the fact that they were fast asleep and somewhat deaf. Another neighbor, Richard, claimed to have seen a black car driving away from Margaret's house around 3 in the morning from his window. He couldn't make out the license plate, but noted the distinctive square headlights and a dent in the side panel. The tragedy unfolded fully the next morning. The Harrisons noticed Margaret's door ajar. At first, they thought the elderly woman had gone into the garden, but seeing no sign of her, they approached. Upon entering, they were greeted by the pungent smell of blood. Inside, they found the bodies of their grandmother, Jonathan, and Emily. Shocked neighbors immediately called the police. Arriving officers documented the scene. The house appeared chaotic. Belongings were scattered about, but not in the manner typical of a typical burglary. Valuables, a television, and an antique clock were untouched in the living room. It seemed the culprit was looking for something specific or was in a hurry. The kitchen and bedrooms had not been fully searched. Investigators immediately identified several details. Shoe prints, size 10 sneakers, were found on the floor. A partially smudged palm print was on the living room windowsill. A crowbar mark was found near the garage door. Tire tracks were found in the garden, matching the description of the black car. Thus, the general picture of the night emerged. The perpetrator entered the house around 2 o'clock, killed the grandmother, then attacked the couple and left, taking several personal belongings. The brutality of the attack indicated that this was not a random break-in, but a carefully planned act. The investigation began immediately after the bodies were discovered. District forensic experts, police officers, and investigators arrived at the scene. The house was cordoned off, and the street was blocked off. Neighbors watched as investigators recorded every detail: shoe prints, fingerprints on the doors, blood stains, and the direction of spatter. Initially, 2 theories were considered: an assault for the purpose of robbery and an assault for personal motives. Forensic experts determined the approximate time of death to be between 2 and 3 a.m. All 3 victims died from stab wounds. The grandmother had 2 stab wounds to the chest, Jonathan had 3 deep stab wounds, and Emily had at least 5. This confirmed the attacker's high level of aggression. Experts noted that the blows were delivered chaotically, without a clear pattern, which is typical of emotional distress. The police first questioned the neighbors. The Harrisons couldn't provide detailed statements, but they confirmed they hadn't heard anything that night. Richard reported seeing a black car near their house around 3 a.m. His description matched what other residents on the street had seen several days before the murder. Investigators checked surveillance footage in the area. A car matching the description was indeed spotted at the nearest gas station, 2 kilometers away. The camera captured a dark sedan with a distinctive dent on the left side. The license plate was unclear due to the quality of the recording, but it gave police a lead. At the same time, an investigation into the family's personal connections began. Jonathan had no criminal record and led a quiet life. At work, he was described as a disciplined employee. Emily, according to colleagues, also had no enemies. However, the police became interested in a former patient of the clinic where she worked. The man had previously made aggressive threats against her after she was denied a prescription for powerful medications. His name was added to the list of suspects. Another line of inquiry turned to the circle of people around Richard's neighbor. Residents on the street mentioned that young men in old cars often visited him. One of these cars partially matched the description of the car seen on the night of the murder. Investigators questioned Richard. He denied any involvement and claimed that his visitors had never been involved in the crimes. Nevertheless, the police requested a background check of his phone records and contacts. A key element was the lack of evidence pointing to robbery. The television, antiques, and electronics were all untouched. Only Emily's bag and Jonathan's phone were missing. Investigators theorized that the killer may have taken them to cover their tracks, calls, messages, or documents. It was later discovered that Emily's card had been used to withdraw money from an ATM in a nearby neighborhood the morning after the murder. A hooded man was captured on camera, but his face was hidden. Forensic experts also examined the discovered shoe print. The sneaker model was popular and widely available, complicating the search. However, a smudge palm print on the windowsill was partially identified. It matched a database of minor offenders. A 27-year-old man named David Miller, previously convicted of theft and assault, came into focus. David lived in a neighboring town and was associated with a group of petty criminals who burglarized homes. When police inspected his car, they discovered a dent on the left side, similar to what neighbors had described. The car matched the make and model of the one photographed at the gas station. A search of Miller's home provided further grounds for suspicion. A knife with traces of a brown stain, later confirmed to be blood, was found in his room. A woman's wallet with no identification and a bank card in the name of Emily Johnson were also found. Jonathan's phone was missing. Miller was detained and taken in for questioning. Initially, he denied any involvement, claiming he had bought the knife and wallet from acquaintances. However, when his alibi was verified, contradictions emerged. Security cameras captured his car a few blocks from Margaret's house an hour before the murder. Furthermore, Emily's card was used when he attempted to withdraw money from an ATM, and a figure similar in build to Miller was visible nearby. The investigation began to piece together the crime. Miller had chosen the elderly woman's house in advance, considering it an easy target. He didn't expect his grandchildren to be there that evening. A confrontation with them led to a brutal ending. After David Miller's arrest, police gathered enough evidence to forward the case to the prosecutor's office. The prosecution was based on a combination of evidence: a knife found with the victim's blood on it, Emily's wallet, surveillance footage, neighbors' statements, and forensic evidence. The trial began in January, generating considerable interest in the area. The courtroom was packed with journalists and relatives of the victims. Emily's parents and Jonathan's sister attended every hearing, demanding justice. The prosecution insisted that Miller had acted deliberately, breaking into the house with the intention of burglarizing it. But upon confronting the owners, he committed the premeditated murder of 3 people. The court heard forensic experts testify. They confirmed that the palm print found on the windowsill belonged to Miller. The shoe print matched the size and model of his sneakers. Blood on the knife matched the DNA of the victims. The evidence was direct and consistent. Neighbors' testimony also bolstered the case. The Harrisons described a suspicious vehicle, and Richard confirmed its departure time. Footage from the gas station and ATM showed Miller's car and a man wearing clothing identical to the one he was wearing when he was arrested. The defense attempted to argue that the evidence could have been planted, and that Miller himself was a victim of circumstance. The lawyer claimed that the items found could have belonged to someone he knew, and the fingerprints could have been in the house by chance. However, inconsistencies in the defendant's own testimony weakened the defense's case. He changed his story several times. First, he denied being in the area, then he talked about visiting friends, and later he claimed he was simply passing by. A psychiatric examination found Miller sane. The conclusion was that he was aware of the nature of his actions and was capable of directing them. The premeditation of the crime was confirmed by the fact that he had brought the weapon with him and acted consistently. Details of the medical examination were read out, at the hearing. Crime scene photographs, descriptions of the injuries, and the circumstances of death were presented to the court. The victims' families were unable to hold back their tears, and the atmosphere in the courtroom grew tense. After 3 weeks of trial, the jury found Miller guilty on all charges: home invasion, aggravated murder, and theft of property. The sentence was harsh: life imprisonment without parole. The judge emphasized that the brutality of the crime and the number of victims left no grounds for leniency. Miller was immediately transferred to a maximum security prison. For the family of the victims, the trial was a difficult ordeal. Emily's parents told reporters that justice had been served, but the loss would remain forever. Jonathan's sister added that the only important thing now was to preserve the memory of their loved ones. Local media covered the case in detail. Residents of the area discussed the incident for a long time, noting that the tragedy had changed the perception of safety in the small town. Many installed new locks and alarms, and authorities increased nighttime patrols. Thus, the trial concluded the investigation, putting an end to the case of a brutal double murder that occurred in the home of an elderly woman.